Go. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Succeed. This is Gearface. I'm so happy to be joined once again by Swordplay. Swordplay, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, always excited to talk to you. Today, we are learning about another Red Horizon character that I characteristically know nothing about. That's my job on this show. We're learning about Miska today and her good gun dog bear. Her good gun dog bear named Bear. Really excited to learn about these two. I don't know much about them. I understand that Swordplay is the person to ask. Couple disclaimers before we get started. As always, number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. That's not the only way you can play Exceed. You can play Exceed for fun. I encourage you to play it for fun. If the lines of play that we're describing don't sound like fun, don't play that way. Play the way you do find fun. Playing to win with Miska and Bear in particular might be a little bit tricky because they are rotated out. They are Red Horizon characters. Season 1 has not been in competitive play for a very long time at this point. So you might have to, in order to apply what you have learned in this lesson, you might need to go find a legacy tournament or just, sit down at your kitchen table with somebody. Doesn't make it any less relevant, obviously. Disclaimer number 2. We are going to be pretty prescriptive about strategy on this show, just for brevity's sake mostly. You might hear Swordplay say things like, always do this, never do this. This is always the way to go. Remember that Exceed's not a solved game, and to take that stuff with a grain of salt. Swordplay is an expert, but even it's just a very informed opinion. We are not saying this is the only way to play the character. And if you find something else that works better, that is not the rules of Swordplay strategy that he's going to lay out for us, please let us know, and we will turn it into a conversation. But yeah, all that aside, Swordplay, please tell me a little bit about our friends Miska and Bear.
Alrighty. Well, first of all, again, as with the gun dog bear, as with Red Horizon, the powers of the characters being their I actually don't remember what they're called. I believe they're soul binds is what they're called.
Oh, you're way over my head at this point, man. I know basically from like a conversation, an overheard conversation with Moriarty, anything about these characters. I don't know anything, so you're already way ahead of me.
Well, Red Horizon was certainly interesting. Essentially, yes, bear is a dog or wolf, but also a rocket launcher, effectively.
That's a good kind of dog to be, especially if you. I mean, so wait, does that mean that in this picture of Miska over here, this is actually okay? Wait, hold on. She has a dog in the background and also a rocket launcher.
Not sure exactly as far as that one's concerned. At least
All
in the
right,
rest of her art, I'm not sure exactly.
I'm gonna have to do some detective work on this. We'll revisit that later on.
But as far as her character, essentially, you as Miska, you are the character. You're the one that can be hit. Exceed has a very strict policy against hitting Bear. You're not allowed to hit Bear. You can only hit Miska.
Of course not.
But Bear can
he's
hit
a
you.
good boy.
That's fair game.
Yeah.
So essentially, Miska has no real ability of her own. Her ability is entirely around being able to move Bear, or notably being able to put Bear into play. Notably, Bear does not begin on the battlefield, so Miska has a mandatory action tax. So at some point, she will have to spend an action to get Bear onto the board. Bear, however, your ability, then this is where we'll get into the first errata of Miska. Bear's ability, as it is printed on the card, is essentially when you place a normal attack to strike, you may pay 2 force to declare that you will calculate its range from Bear's position. There's a number of reasons to go into, like how this doesn't really work with the way that Exceed's system is set up.
Oh, so this would make like an unenforceable game state, right? Like if I put down an attack and it's not a normal attack, did I use my ability or not?
That is the how the engine maintains that. It could have been made to be enforceable, but the change was just never made. And it seemed that season 1 was kind of left behind, and so the odds that it ever actually does get officially changed is not exactly clear.
Right, sure.
But officially, technically, it's illegal to use a special when she uses that ability. but the game itself doesn't really have a means of enforcing that. So essentially, there's a official, unofficial errata that it essentially works kind of like critically in season 3, and that is she declares that if it is a normal attack, it will calculate range from bear, but there's no real enforcement on force to play a normal attack.
Okay, so
Notably,
I can
with the
bluff with them
original
then.
version, correct.
Okay.
And notably, with the original version, that also means that she wouldn't technically be allowed to wild swing and declare from bear because she couldn't verify that the wild swing would be a
What
normal.
was going to be a normal? Like even if every single thing in your deck was a normal, it you wouldn't be able to do that.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
Uh, so, for the sake of this going forward, I will be assuming that we're using the errata version of Miska. I will bring up toward the end some changes that might happen if you're assuming that you are playing the non-errated version and uh, playing by the rules, even though the rules aren't enforceable.
Right. Playing by the rules as written. Sure. So, but
Yeah.
with what we have right here, we have a character who at some point, so in opening positions here, uh Bear's not anywhere. First turn as Miska, I'm like, cool, okay. Put Bear down, that's my action. Um
A lot of the time, not quite necessarily, but usually it'll be within the first 3 turns.
okay. And then at any point on my turn as an action, I can just put him anywhere. He doesn't have a movement speed, he doesn't have a number of spaces he can move, he just goes to the place.
Correct.
Um and then after that, uh I put a card down. It's a normal, let's say the for purposes of argumentation, let's say it's assault. Um, I put it down. I pay my 2 force. And my normal is going to come from bear, which means that it is now a um. If it's assault and my opponent's here, for example, does bear move?
No,
Is the before close to comes from bear as well?
no. The any other effects regarding, like, so for example, in this case, close 2, Miska will be the one that is closing 2. The range, however, will come from bear, regardless of where bear is. If you
Gotcha.
had declared the normal from bear.
Gotcha. Okay, so dive and assault still move me in, not bear. They are both range 1 cards in that case, or range 1 from bear cards in that case.
Correct, which does
Okay.
make things specifically like assault and dive a little more difficult to use. Although it makes it gives some more utility to dive, as we'll get to later.
Okay. So in terms of how this sort of like informs a game plan, I clearly have the ability to play normals from all over the place. That seems cool. Like I like that. Is that something that I'm going to be doing a lot as Miska? Is that basically the plan? Is use bear as kind of like a mobile disjointed hitbox?
That is the ideal plan, and I'd use the same term of disjointed hitbox, being able to use normals from all ranges, uh, including from ranges that they normally like wouldn't be usable against.
Right.
Um, to cover this one of the ideal ones, of course, is being able to essentially spike from bear at range 1.
Sure. Right. Yeah. It doesn't matter a lot what they do to me. I might not get stunned with foreguard on spike, and they'll just eat the counter. They'll eat the counter attack. Okay.
Right. It's also a little unfair as you can spike them, but they cannot spike you.
Sure. Yeah, because you can't hit bear because he's a good boy.
Yes, you
Okay.
cannot hit the good boy.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. So my game plan, literally not looking at any cards in her kit so far, is going to involve a lot of putting bear on the field and then threatening. Um,
Correct.
I'm also noticing that. Yep. Okay. So things that come from bear, this can happen on defense as well. So if Ryu throws a Hadouken at me, I'm like, awesome, grasp, and the grasp comes from bear and it outspeeds even on defense. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Cool.
The notable things as far as the normals from bear, one is of course the 2 force cost to be able to declare from bear.
Right.
That is 2 force is not a super steep cost, but it is definitely noteworthy as it's 2 force in addition to the card being played. Uh, the other thing to note is that the normal ranges, well, for one, as far as the force costs are concerned, Miska also does not have any other extra card draw. Let's say if she's going to draw cards, she has to prepare or change cards the old-fashioned way. She doesn't have any, boosts that are draw 3 cards, then
Right.
strike or something.
Right. Okay. So without the ability to pay for bear, this is either going to be an occasional thing that I get to do, or it's going to be I'm going to be playing a pretty slow paced game, and I'm going to be prepping a lot and changing cards from gauge a lot to afford this thing.
It depending on how you do it. Typically, as with most season ones, Miska does almost always want to exceed.
Okay.
Miska's exceed is essentially exactly the same. The only thing her exceeding does is the ability to exceed bear, let's say.
Sure.
And bear's effect is exactly the same, except you no longer need to pay to declare normals from bear. You simply declare it. It doesn't cost you anything. You still have to make the decision and declare that you will calculate normals from bear. However, it doesn't require any extra resources.
You just get to say that you do it whenever you do. All right, yeah. I mean, and 0 force is a lot less than 2 force, so that's
Yeah.
it's approximately 2 less. That seems very very beneficial to me. So it's 3 gauge. I'm gunning for this. It sounds like then is this sort of like priority number 1 for my game plan is exceeding as quickly as possible.
It definitely tends to be. As mentioned, with most season ones, that tends to be the case. Maybe not exceeding as soon as possible. It's a little more flexible than with some other characters. However, she does ultimately want to exceed pretty much any game, regardless of the circumstance.
Okay.
Being able to threaten the normals is a very significant part of her offensive ability.
Okay. And so that probably means that in most games, assuming things are going decently well, if I'm prioritizing things well, if I've landed a couple hits, got some gauge, I will be this Miska in bear for like most of the game. This is not something like 3 gauge is not that hard to hit, like at least most of the time for most characters. If I'm prioritizing it, we should be evaluating Miska then as though it's this Miska for most of the time. Is that correct?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
It's like outside of obviously like opening plans. That this is you're going to plan to get into the succeed state
As quick as you can do it safely, sure.
right.
Do you find yourself when you are this Miska? Do you find yourself using your normals coming from bear very often, or is it really the kind of thing that you're like, yeah, I mean, I could just wait a couple turns and exceed and then do it, and
Right.
that would be better.
Typically, you don't want to expend the resources if you don't have to. Although one of your main priorities is, of course, getting that 3 gauge. So usually, yes, you'll pay from bear, but only if you're sure that you're going to get like at least a gauge out of it.
Right.
So for like if you're going to go ahead and grasp from bear, go ahead. Even if you don't necessarily win the strike per se, if it was a gauge you could have gotten from a distance and couldn't have done that, like if you were yourself with at range 1 instead, doing so to get the gauge out of it, or if you just are pretty sure that you have a winning strike, but you wouldn't use it maybe to fake out your opponent. Unless you've got a pretty good fake out. Generally, you want to make sure that 2 force is being used to the best of its ability.
Sure. Okay. And again, I won't need to wait that long most of the time because 3 gauge and exceeding is not that difficult to hit most of the time for most characters.
Especially so when you're able to threaten, grasp, and cross from range 6.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about like confirming gauge, that seems like a pretty decent way to do it.
Right.
So I have a guaranteed turn where I am going to be exceeding. That is another kind of move tax that you mentioned for
Almost always exceeding.
Okay.
The few occasions where you wouldn't are in situations where the game happens to kind of wildly swing in your favor. For example, if you manage to have like a very good first 2 or 3 turns, and you manage to hit with this ability, for example, because it has a push your opponent as far as possible, and you ended up with 3 gauge, your opponent's down to like 15 life, and you're over here. Then maybe your Scorched Earth Ultra looks very appealing, so maybe that gauge will be better spent on that. but that's assuming that the intro went very poorly for your opponent, very good for you.
Incredibly well for you. Sure. Okay. Most of the time against like a competent opponent who knows how to fight Miska and who, like assuming that I don't have the greatest luck of all time, the
Yeah.
plan is probably to exceed.
Yes.
Okay, sure. So I've got, one turn to put bear down, another turn to exceed. That's 2 turns of prep work, basically, of downtime, and then obviously all of my economic stuff that I might have to do over the course of the game. So is there any concern about? Oh, I guess once I'm sorry to interrupt myself. Once bear is on the field, he stays on the field, right? That's just a one-time thing that Miska has to do.
Right.
Okay. So
once he's on the board, he stays.
Is there any concern about do you have to do that only when it's safe to do it? Like if you're not going to do it turn 1, for example, is it kind of like prepping or changing cards or something, like the rules for putting bear down are like you have to do it when you're not going to get punched in the face for it? Or is it something that advances your game plan so much that you will sort of do it as soon as you can?
It is certainly more the latter, especially as a lot of the time you can end up in a situation that might be disadvantageous to you, but just the act of putting bear down overcomes that. For example, if looking at Miska's like specials and ultras, range 1 is definitely not her strong suit.
Sure.
So she'd be very much relying on her normals. But then, like being in range 1 specifically, shuts off a lot of options as being like necessarily good options at that range.
Right.
However, being able to put bear down here, for example, now gives you a little bit better options. For example, your opponent crossing from here. Like to get out of a sweep is going to end up here and still get hit by sweep from
and
bear.
still get hit by sweep. Sure. Okay. So that kind of means that unlike prepping, unlike changing cards, I can kind of think of like the threat matrix that I'm establishing when I put bear down as being sort of similar to a boost. And I don't think of a boost as like a down tempo action. This is something that actually does establish a threat in addition to it being attacks that I'm going to do at some point.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And even if you do have to pay for them, especially because you're able to do them on offense or on defense rather,
right?
It at least forces your opponent to respect bear as an option, and for every turn that you are spending with bear not on the board is kind of more allowing your opponent to act freely without worrying about your honestly greatest threat.
Gotcha. Okay. So get bear down early, exceed early, build gauge to exceed early, and then after that, again, not having even looked at the kit yet, run offense from your normals with bear as often as you can.
Yes, offense and defense.
Sure, right. Get damage with bear. Run your game plan with bear as often as you can from that point out. Okay.
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I was going to get into her specials and ultras.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like a good time to do
it. And starting off with, we'll go with Silverfang. You're on the left. Silverfang is her on curve safe option. Notably, it is range 1 to 3, which is the only one that she has that's like that, making it one of her only options to threaten when you're right in front of her.
When you're actually scrapping in like what we would normally consider like regular exceed range.
Right. And then I guess I should specify the option that she can threaten from Miska specifically as a special.
Right. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Looking at some of the rest of this range band here, there's not a lot of ones, and this one comes from bear. This one comes from bear. Okay. Yeah. So this is your actual like normals range special.
Yes.
Okay.
Notably, only 3 power. Not much, but it's respectable amount of damage. Speed 5, hit, push the opponent up to 3 spaces, and it's up to 3, so you can choose to not push them at all if you so chose, or push them 1 or 2. After, move bear, you move bear to any space. Notably, as an after effect, there are many situations where you can say you're at range 3 and your opponent crosses away from you. They didn't hit you, so they didn't stun you, but you still get that after effect, which can be useful. Although most of the time, if a player's not going to cross away from Miska unless they accidentally wild swung into it most of the time.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
because it seems like she wants to keep her opponent pretty far away from her anyway.
Right. It can be a funny situation when, especially at range 3, and you use Silver Fang because you intended to push them 3 anyway,
Right, and they're like,
and then they crossed away, and you
hey,
still get
listen,
your after effect because you were going to move Bear up to them anyway.
it's like,
So hitting them or them crossing away ends up making the battlefield look exactly the same.
listen, I'll push me away. You don't need to push me away. I'll do it for you.
Yeah. At least if they cross away, you don't get 3 damage and a gauge out of it. So it's a little bit better for them, arguably.
Sure. So I mean, just like pushing 3 is cool. Even at range 1, this would dodge a sweep. Uh,
Right.
Up to 3 gives me lots and lots of positional stuff. I can see where on curve push 3. I mean that beats the entire range 3 normals mix up. That's great. But the after effect, move your bear marker to any space. Um, Unlike other puppet characters, I've had lessons on Zato, for example, who has some difficulty actually getting Eddie into play, or a lesson on, for example, Carl Clover, who really can only move Nirvana like one space at a time. My character ability gives me a lot of control over putting Bear wherever I want to. Is this after effect still really valuable just because it kind of saves me a turn?
It is. Although the other note to get into, this one isn't an errata, but it is a clarification. This allows you to move Bear to any space. This does not allow you to put Bear down if he wasn't already.
Oh,
This is not going to help you get around the initial. She must still spend that action at least once to get Bear down in the first place. This
gotcha,
just allows you to move Bear after Bear's already down, though.
gotcha. So then,
And yes,
and
it is still significant, as normally you'd have to spend your whole action to move Bear. Being able to move Bear in the middle of a strike, and not having to have, especially if you successfully moved them, say where you wanted them, and then were able to move Bear to
to threaten
compensate for
them
where their new position,
in their new
all
range,
in
right?
all in one swift movement. Especially so if it was your opponent's strike and you did that on defense, and now you're just ready to go right where you wanted to be. So yes, having it on there is significant.
Okay, cool. So even though Bear is super mobile and can kind of go wherever he needs to on my turn, um, action compression is still action compression. That's still really valuable to me.
Yes.
Okay,
It
cool.
can also be useful discard on defense. Um, in certain circumstances where you're essentially, even if your attack wasn't going to necessarily win you the strike, um, uh, let's say you're at a distance and you didn't have Bear where you wanted. Usually against like another like ranged character.
Right.
Depending on what options you had available. Let's say Ryu is Hadokening you. I guess Hadoken is a bad example. Ish, she does have a defense option, but
He
in
he
some circumstances, when you're at a
he didn't have
distance
a
and
he didn't have a
you
crit, so it's under 5 speed.
yeah, so
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to hit Ryu, but at least if you were able to get your after effect to be able to reposition Bear, so you got something out of the strike rather than just playing, uh, a spike and getting hit. I guess if you had spike, you could have spiked from Bear, but trying to think of an example here.
Well, I
So a
mean,
slow option like your
it,
K9 strike, you would have gotten hit first and then just lost it anyway.
it's kind of like I mean, in the situation we were just talking about, where if they empty cross out of your Silver Fang, people do that. People do strike just for positioning sometimes, or respond to a strike just for positioning sometimes, like a cross. Um, if you're doing that, you're not moving, but you are establishing position from Bear on your opponent's turn. It's the same principle. It's the same as defensively crossing out of something to get to range.
Right.
Okay, so just getting your after speed 5 is pretty like it's fairly likely. This is on or above curve in a lot of places. You'll probably get this.
Usually, yeah, it's another pretty fairly easy confirm, as well as just the ability to threaten it closer, as it makes sweep not a safe option.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, close up, it's a mid speed, and would dodge some slows. Okay. Do we want to talk attacks and boosts at the same time, or should we go through all the attacks and then all the boosts?
I think we can go attacks and boost at the same time.
Sure. Okay.
I was going to point out like one more fairly obvious thing. but with again with it being an after effect, it's also useful against certain characters that have like attacks that have speed 5 or greater don't hit you. So even if you didn't get your hit, you still get that repositioning for bear.
Right. Right. Okay.
Uh,
And as we established, positioning with bear is very, very important for the rest of what I want to be doing with all these cards over here.
right. And as for the boost, 0 cost, it's essentially a key charge. Add this card to your gauge, but you also get to move bear. So you get to you get your gauge and you're getting your action to move bear at the same time. It is definitely useful, depending on the circumstance. The attack is very, very good on its own, so it can be. It's essentially getting the hit for gauge and the after to move bear without the possibility of missing and not getting the gauge,
Or getting hit
or
back.
getting stunned. Yeah. So it can be useful depending on the circumstance. But generally you'd rather hit with it if you could,
Sure.
because you could also push with it.
Right. The push effect on Silver Fang is around half of why I'm using it. If all I wanted to do was get gauge and it was my action. I'm sorry, if all I wanted to do was move bear and it was my action, I could just put bear down and I wouldn't get gauge. But by playing Silver Fang, I have bear, push, and gauge all at once.
Right. And the particularly with depending on where she can set up, for example, if she has bear close to her and the opponent is further away, if she has, say, she's already exceeded and has 2 gauge, then something like this to be able to get that 3rd gauge to threaten the ultra and move bear at the same time, and be able to establish like a very strong position all in one move, then that's when it's more useful. Um, uh,
So
or to be able to, if you had bear in a not good position and you wanted to exceed, but if you were to exceed, you'd still have bear in a bad position even though you were exceeded, like this, because bear's not really doing anything over here. Then being able to do this to get the gauge to exceed later and still be able to move bear, so you're not wasting a turn necessarily. You're still working toward that initial goal.
So you would use this, the key charge effect on patrol, in order to get over a gauge breakpoint while also doing something that you were planning to do anyway. Otherwise, you might
Yes.
just want to hit with Silver Fang.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, but that's that one. Pretty just all around good attack. Next up we have Kneecapper, and this is uh, one of the only reasons you might not want to put bear down on the first turn, as if you have this in your opener. This is a very strong opening attack. Range 2 to 4, power 3, which is significant as we'll get to with the ignore guard. Speed 4, hit, move up to 2. And so
Wow.
this is a very potent at range 4. Most characters do not have a solid way to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, on curve, ignore guard already is
And
mean, but then
and
you
more
also have
so.
flexible positioning.
Right. And it's yeah, flexible because you can move forward or back and it's up to 2.
Right.
Particularly the 3 damage is significant with the ignore guard as well, as that does mean that it will break focus.
Sure. I mean, even at range 2, like now it's spike. In a lot of situations, it is a faster spike.
Right.
Okay.
So this is one of the essentially what your opponent has to get out of this is to block or cross. But if they cross, they kind of establish that distance that you wanted anyway.
Right.
And if they block, you're still going to hit them, and you're gonna establish your own distance. So pretty much no matter what, you get the distance that you wanted. Is just a question of did you get the gauge or not.
Okay.
And so it ends up being this is one of the reasons why I might not put bear down immediately, because I want to hit with this and I want to get that first opening move. Because if I place bear, then I open up my opponent being able to boost cross and then lose that opportunity.
Right. So sometimes in Exceed we talk about like the move don't move mix up, like conceivably on turn 1 Ryu could strike with Hadoken or could strike with dive, and they lose to different things. But like, first of all, Kneecapper does not seem to need a mix up, because
Right.
what is it losing to outside of like above curve dives or something like that? But also, like, diving in, like, it seems like I don't want to be close up. So it seems like Kneecapper doesn't require a mix up and is just sort of like a default turn 1 play if I'm not going to put bear down. So like the mix up between The mix up is between striking with kneecapper and my opponent losing the strike, or putting bear down and not striking at all. Is that kind of accurate?
Pretty much. There's two other considerations that are similar. However, this one is by far the more reliable of the three.
Okay. So just really, really good opening attack. Whenever you find yourself at range 4, seems pretty free to put down.
Yes.
Um, will you use it closer up as well, or is this something that you really, really want to land when you are far away?
Preferably far away, as it's just safer. You're not really afraid of anything as far as normals are concerned. Some characters obviously have some means of getting around this. For example, of course, if you went second and Ryu took his first action to key charge, for example, now this is not safe.
Right.
But yes, in most cases, just being able to throw this at range 4, at range 3, even still, probably. Just there's more specials that tend to be. It varies on the situation.
Sure.
But most of the time, preferably at range 4. Yes.
And assuming like a non-compliant opponent, I have not gotten to the point in this lesson where we're talking about counterplay, but I'm assuming that Miska does not like it when her opponent is here, or here rather. If I have to, this hits at range 2. I could use it. I can back up. It's still a way to dodge sweep. It's still a way to set positioning. It's still an ignore guard attack. I would just prefer to not use it there if I had any choice.
Right.
Gotcha.
This is also a significant one. Because that is correct. Miska does not like you to be in her face. It's not terrible, as you still even at ranges like this, the disjointed hitbox does help quite a lot.
Right.
However, she would prefer to be able to threaten normals against you when you can't also threaten normals back, as it just by sheer options. Even if you have answers, you only have so many, and I have all my normals.
All of these and all of your
here.
normals, right? Yeah,
Right.
that is just by weight of numbers. You are probably winning those exchanges. Okay.
It also it's the other reason why Miska's like a zoner, but is also very strong even against other zoners, as even the other zoners only have their specials and ultras usually to threaten with at such a distance.
Oh,
Miska
sure.
has her own specials and has her normals.
Yeah, I mean, some zoners are like part-time zoners because if they have a handful of normals, they're like, well, okay, I guess I got to brawl now. Miska can zone with her normals just fine.
Right.
Okay.
And that's a most one of the examples is I suppose New 13, who can essentially do the same thing.
Right. Yeah, and also actually has the same like economic concern as stuff from Bear is because all of her stuff is expensive.
Right.
Okay, so there's some commonality there. How about
But
so that's Kneecapper. Unless you had more to say about that card.
well, there's specifically regarding the when your opponent is closer, having the essentially the bait option, being able to usually you don't want to spend the force, but if you're exceeded and you can say you're going to play kneecapper and you declare that your normals will come from bear, then there's the question of is this a range 1 normal that's coming from bear, or this could very well be a special such as kneecapper, which means
Right.
like sweep effectively range 1 might have been safe, but isn't safe here because of where Miska's hitting from.
Because of Kneecapper. And I mean, so I mean, range 2 grasp, range 3 grasp is almost unbeatable a lot of the time because
Yeah.
you can push far enough out to dodge sweep and things like that. So they're like, cool, I play focus, and you're like, cool, I kneecapper you.
Yeah.
So you kind of have a built-in mix up there.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
Uh, Going into boost, pretty like basic. It's move 4,
Yep.
acrobatics. It doesn't cost any force. Notably, that is not move up to 4. It is 4. So you're going to be advancing or retreating 4 in either direction.
Right. Okay. So just in terms of so it's in some ways it's better backstep because I could also move forward with it to get out of the corner or something like that. But I have no flexibility on my positioning at all.
Right.
Okay.
Generally, as far as Miska is concerned, that's not usually a problem, as if you're advancing with it, you usually wanted to get as far over them as you could. Or if you were retreating with it, as far as Miska is concerned, like as far away as possible is where they want to be.
Farther is better pretty much all the time.
Pretty much, yes.
Okay.
There's maybe a very few circumstances where you didn't want to move all 4, but those are rare.
Okay. So realistically, whenever I use this boost, it'll be fine because that's where I probably want to land anyway.
Usually, yes.
How does it compare to Kneecapper?
It is depending on the circumstance. Sometimes, depending on the character, some characters are slower and tend to have more guarded moves, which makes Kneecapper just that much better.
Right.
Where some other characters tend to be somewhat similar to Miska as having essentially no moves with guard on them.
There's no
Although
guard to ignore,
Miska,
basically.
right, which makes it significantly less valuable, especially because the unguarded uh, characters tend to have slightly above curve options to compensate,
Right.
which means that this is less likely to hit and is less useful even when it does. So it typically, just depending on the circumstance, your opponent. But even then, uh, depending on if the game has gone on for long enough and some of the faster options have been lost by your opponent, it tends to look better over time, depending on how their deck has gone. So it varies, but um, generally, I would like to hit with this if I have distance and am not afraid of. I'm essentially using it as a like nigh uncounterable option. Otherwise, it's useful as an escape, depending on if I can get Bear in a good position or if my opponent has me cornered. Especially because it's 4, which is all the way over here. That's
Right.
a pretty good jump out of the corner for 0 force.
So you'll play acrobatics when you're forced to, because when you're running your game plan the way that you want to, you'll be able to never need to get away from anybody. But assuming a non-compliant opponent means that at some point you are going to have to escape them, and acrobatics is pretty good for that. You're just losing a good card by doing it.
True. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
And that's just basically as far as Kneecapper goes. Not a whole lot to say about it other than that.
Okay.
Uh, and next we have Canine Strike. This one is interesting. It definitely depends on the circumstance. So range 3 to 7, power 3, speed 3, no armor or guard. Before retreat as far as possible. So it's definitely because it's fairly slow. It is not a safe option most of the time. However, it is a very interesting, say, uh, most of the time your opponent's not going to end up having moved you here. But if you end up in a position somewhat like this, being able to get all of that distance away from your opponent,
Right.
especially when you're able to hit them because it's a before effect, which is noteworthy as it means it doesn't hit at 1 or 2, but it technically hits at 1 or 2 because you're going to be retreating
Because
first.
you'll leave first. It's like retreating bolts on fight. It's a range 1 card, but really it's a range 3 card, but really it's a range 1 card. The range band is a little bit deceptive here.
Yes,
Okay.
although I guess unlike retreating bolts, it's not fast.
True. Yeah, no, it's not a cross like or anything like that. I'm also noticing that like if you're in this position, it will never hit, right?
Correct. If your opponent is in either corner, this attack can't hit.
Okay. Weird.
Hidden bold text on the card.
Weird. Okay, so unless I like assault in or something for whatever reason. So
Right.
so
Although usually as Miska, it's 3 damage and a gauge you didn't get, but even this Miska's pretty much okay with being able this kind of distance, especially if Air's over here. That's I would gladly boost with something like that and not have gotten damage or a gauge anyway.
yeah, I mean if move 4 spaces is good, then retreat as far as possible is also probably pretty good.
Yes.
Okay. Um so when you're using it, it is super unsafe in most positions. But when you're using it, are you usually using it just for the before effect?
Almost always. It is only 3 damage. It doesn't really beat anything. I suppose you could argue it beats sweep if your opponent was sweeping against you at a range like that, but
Right.
chances are your opponent was already concerned about cross. So and cross would have worked almost the same. It just would have been more reliable because at least it wouldn't lose to.
Is it everything else that they're doing? Right. Because so it crosses faster, but it doesn't land you as far, but it's far enough to dodge a thing. So if they're playing around cross, they're playing around canine strike every single time.
Typically, yeah. I
Okay.
suppose it is harder to as because cross is faster. It essentially gives you more cross options, cross likes, let's say.
Right.
Um, Because if they could deal with your crosses, can they deal with your crosses and your canine strikes? Do they have enough cards to deal with that?
Sure, yeah, it's redundant, but at the same time, it's not that hard to hit a 3-speed 0 guard. It's not that hard to stop this.
Yeah,
Okay,
typically no.
okay. So you'll use it to get all the way across the board in a situation, but like if my opponent is here, for example, literally, why wouldn't I play cross instead?
Yeah, it can depend depending on the circumstance. Uh, some oddballs, particularly like in season one, say Reese's checkmate attacks at range one don't hit you. This doesn't hit at range one because it retreats
True.
first.
Okay, so specifically the before movement effect could actually affect things like that. Interesting. Okay.
Because checkmate is also, I don't remember, but I think it's speed one. It might be zero. I think it's one. But that's one example. Which even if you weren't going to use it, your opponent is at least going to consider whether they want to spend that gauge on that ultra if you have something like this.
Checkmate is in fact speed one. Good memory. So just having the option can be relevant if an opponent has like a checkmate, for example, to that you can't get out of otherwise.
Right.
Okay.
And that's one of those examples. But typically, you can just throw it as a means of trying to escape. Even if you don't hit, though it does depend on obviously where your opponent is. If you're already in a position like this, it becomes significantly less useful.
Right.
Um, but it is a situational attack for sure. You put this when you're trying to get that movement effect out of it. It's not really a good offensive option most of the time.
Okay. And how about a helping hand?
That is an interesting boost. It is effective, +2 power, +2 speed for 1 force. It is Way of the Warrior. However, it's Way of the Warrior that you need to be on bear to use.
Right.
It could also be looked at as somewhat similar to like Inseparable from Shovel and Shield in that regard. However, the difference is that Shovel will tend to stand on shield often anyway, just for the other movement effect and one of like being able to just freely move onto
And
Shovel.
one of your ultras like comes from like tandem attack needs you to be in that position anyway. There doesn't seem
Right.
to be anything else in Miska's kit that wants Bear and her in similar spots like that.
Right, and that is the kind of downside. It's a downside for two reasons. One is because usually just through regular play, you don't often find yourself just kind of standing on bear by accident.
Right.
You had to intentionally do that. There's a few like awkward situations where you might end up diving into this position, but it's pretty rare that you end up just accidentally standing on bear.
Right.
So you kind of have to do that intentionally, which has the problem of one, you didn't really have much reason to do that anyway, especially because the entire appeal of bear is having that disjointed hitbox. But by putting bear on yourself, you've now lost the advantage
Yeah.
that you had in the first place.
Now you're overlapping with your own hitbox.
Right.
Okay.
And the other problem is because there wasn't really any purpose other than this that you wanted to, which also kind of telegraphs to your opponent that this is why you did that in the first place.
Oh, sure. And then they're like, cool, parry canine strike or whatever, and now you've lost the thing you did.
Right.
Okay.
So, or even if not parry, at least, like I suppose you could try to use it as like a, kind of like playing mind games with your opponent, to try to get them to, like do this to try to bait them to immediately try to grasp you to get you off of bear, so you couldn't do what you wanted. But if that's what you intended to do in the first place, maybe you were planning to focus the whole time because you were betting that they were going to try to grasp you.
Right.
Interesting mind games, but generally, it's difficult to make use of this boost just because you have to intentionally put yourself in this position, which usually ends up meaning that it takes 2 turns to set this up.
Right.
So without a very good reason to do so, it's difficult to utilize that.
Okay. And I mean, +2 power, +2 speed is probably a 1 strike. That's a very, very strong boost. Way of the Warrior is a really, really, really strong boost. But doing it over 2 turns and giving my opponent ample time to counterplay me sounds like it's difficult to actually make use of this. But it also sounds like Canine Strike itself is not the most overwhelming card in your kit. Is this card often just force then?
Very, very often. It can also admittedly, one of the things you might want to do with it is at least hold on to it as an option, but also the prospect of being able to EX it and have a speed 4 be able to do it makes it a bit more reliable as far as using it for that before effect.
Sure. Okay.
Um, but this is often just a force effect.
All right, and I mean, at least on front side, I might occasionally need to pay some force to use bear. This could be a target for that. But also, even
Right.
after that, I mean, everybody's got to spend force sometimes.
Yep.
Sounds good. Sounds good. How about fire in the hole?
Fire in the hole is where we finally get out of the 3 damages and now into 6, which is significant. Although
Yeah,
this one is
that's a
speed
lot more than
0.
free.
It is range 3 to 5, so fairly long range. It has stun immunity, which is where Miska is a little bit deceptive, as she has no guard or armor on any of her abilities, but she does have 3 different stun immune moves, so she's a little bit tougher than she looks at first glance.
Okay.
Although that does mean that she's taking all the damage, she's just not getting stunned by it.
Right. There's no armor anywhere, but there's also sometimes like sneakily Infinity Guard on
Yeah.
her cards. Okay.
uh, does have hit push as far as possible. So this is a also potential move that you might do in the opener. Um, being able to essentially get that same position you were looking for with Kneecapper.
Right.
Uh, the difference is that unlike the Speed 4 option that ignores guard, this one you're not really worried about guard, as at least you're going to push them anyway and you're going to deal some significant damage. Um, but there's also the fact that it's speed 0, so your opponent can just dive into it.
Right.
Granted,
Yeah.
that's them betting that you're not using Kneecapper. However, because even though it's stun immune, because it doesn't hit at that range anyway, it kind of like Spike in Assault. You didn't stun them, but they can't hit you anyway.
Right. Right. And I mean, like Kneecapper is notable for being on curve at speed 4 at range 4. Fire in the hole is on curve nowhere. Like this seems like it would be quite hard to hit with.
It does depend. Most characters don't really have anything to hit you with at range 5.
True.
Well, I guess I won't say most characters, but like at least as far as normals are concerned, it's not uncommon to have no options available at range 5. Especially like here, we have a good example here because of Ryu. Ryu's option to hit you with at range 5 is his own projectile, which notably doesn't move him. So even though he hits you, you're stun immune, you're going to hit back and still get what you wanted. You just take
Right.
some damage out of it.
Okay, so in the kind of context of a fireball war, this is my slow fireball that shoves my opponent to where I want them to be. That's very, very strong. But it seems like I would need a mix-up option to facilitate that. Does that mean that kind of the periods where I'm most likely to land this card are like when I have bear right next to them?
That is one good example. With again goes into like the being able to declare that you are using declaring you're using your ranges of that you're calculating normals from bear and then striking with fire in the hole.
Right, right. Okay, so now that they're trying to mitigate grasp with a slow option or something, they're going to use a Tatsu, and oh no, they've landed at range 3. I push them back out or something.
Right.
Okay, okay,
Uh, Other than that, it is also it just hits hard and gets that distance.
right,
Um, it can be especially useful with something like reading, as it's one of her few, I'd say, like combo attacks. Something like just being able to read just a whole lot of options, just say grasp, and then being able to get that distance to set up for like your scorched earth, or even just being able to just harass them with bear for a long time because now they've got to spend that force or
they
use
got to
other
walk
resources to
in
get up to you.
for a long, long time. Sure. So fire in the hole is a push as far as possible. Canine strike is a retreat as far as possible. I'm noticing sort of a commonality here. It seems like I don't really have that much difficulty making a lot of range.
Right. That is where it's important for notably with both of these options when your opponent has you in this kind of position because you can't really retreat anywhere and they're not in range of your push. So
Right.
like this is where you don't want to be with Miska most of the time.
So
Um,
range 1 and 2 are dangerous partially because you don't have any ways, or not many ways at least, to keep your opponent from staying at range 1 and 2.
yeah. Again, it's also not even just range 1 and 2. Like this is fine. It's the range 1 and 2 when you're stuck in the
When
corner.
you're cornered, because then
Yeah.
canine strike is turned off too. Okay, I see.
But it also means like you can't retreat with like say kneecapper. You still have your silver fang to push them back with. But it does because even with this, the movement that you would get, you'd move here, especially against somebody like Ryu, because he's just gonna do this.
Yeah, he'll just stay on you until you do like a really really big movement effect to get him off the board. So you need to set range in order to set more range. It seems like.
Yes, she's better at keeping her distance than she is at establishing it once she's lost it. Is a good way to put it.
I gotcha. Okay. So cross into fire in the hole, cross into canine strike, dive over the opponent into canine strike, like something to get from range 1 to range 4 might need to come from a normal, might need to come from Silver Fang, something like that. But once I've got it, I can keep it pretty well.
Right, and this is also like this is exactly the kind of situation where your acrobatics boost is particularly handy, as
Gotcha.
you get to that distance that you wanted.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. How
Um,
about protect your master?
this is a another situational one. To better talk about this, we would have to go over the. We'll do this. As far as we'll get to the boost after we get to these two.
Okay,
Um,
sounds good.
we got Bear Rush, and this is where the other notable thing I just realized I forgot to mention. The thing with Bear being able to, you can calculate your normals from Bear. Because normals all have ranges of 1 to something, or in the case of Spike, 2 to 3. Notably, they do not hit at 0. So when your opponent is
Oh,
standing on Bear, Bear cannot hit them with normals.
they're safe from all of his normals shenanigans. Okay,
Right, provided that they didn't move first, but
right.
that's a given. Um, and this is where Bear Rush is 0 to 1. So this is one of the options that Bear can hit if you are standing on Bear. Uh, this one always calculates range from Bear. No declaration from Bear required. Uh, hit +1 power for each card in the opponent's hand and move them 1 space. Another like rules clarification. It is not move them. It's not +1 power and move them 1 for every force or for every card in your opponent's hand.
You will
You
always move
only
them exactly one.
right.
Gotcha.
The power is the only thing that changes. It is a speed 5. So again, another one of those very above curve at good distances. Um, the other note with the power based on their hand, it means that when your opponent is in a situation where they were like at a great distance and they wanted to like spend force to move up to you, for example, one of the problems with that is that they need to kind of build up some force in their hand to do so, unless they're going to spend it from gauge. Which means
Right.
that the longer that they wait to move up to you, the more force that they're building up to spend to get up to you, the harder this hits them. So it's kind of it puts a clock on your opponent when you have Bear just sitting on them.
So this makes being at extreme range from Miska even more punishing than it would have been with all of my disjointed normals. It just says like, all right, take 7, I guess, take 8
Right.
if you're prepping a million times.
And the other thing to note with this is it doesn't have a maximum on the power. Normally, your hand size would be fairly limited at say 7 if you have a full hand.
Right.
Um, Granted, you're going to end up striking with one of them usually, so it's going to be +6 most of the time unless you wild swung. Uh, but against certain characters, notably, I don't think any from season 1, but like for example, Sajin Exceed mode has unlimited hand size.
Unlimited hand size, or like
Or
Guile, or even
yeah,
Gold Lewis. Like they
yeah,
could get hit really hard by this.
right. The those characters who have because you got 12 cards in your hand and now you're getting hit for 13 at speed 5 from the other side of the board. That's
Right.
pretty nasty.
Right.
Uh,
I I also I also
especially funny might be a Kokonoe who has used her Astral Heat and picked up her whole deck.
entire deck it just dies instantly. That's very funny. Okay, so I've noticed also that this is so when we were talking about Fire in the Hole being sort of enabled by mix-up options like Grasp from Bear at range 4 or 5, um, uh, that would require specifically errated Miska. Uh, Bear Rush enables this mix-up no matter what rule. No, like even under the original rules as read, way to play the character. These two cards mix each other up just same way that the normals do because they always come from Bear.
Right.
Okay. That actually kind of made me think of a different question, which is if I am exceeded and I have bear in this, I mean, even in like a sort of more uh, normal range, um, is there ever a reason to not declare that my attack is coming from bear?
Usually only when you're let's say for one, one good example is say Chip from season 7, or like maybe a more like closer to Miska's time frame, somebody like Zolt, who has like if he uses normals, his normals have after move one. Somebody like Zolt could say if you declared that you were using a normal from bear, um, and that's that they were trying to call, like they were assuming you were actually hitting with a normal. If Zolt were to say grasp, even though he's not going to hit you, he's just going to move on to bear. And if you were using a normal from
Oh,
bear, bear can't hit them now.
okay. So I am turning off when I declare attacks coming from bear. They could be normals, they could be specials. What they cannot be is normals coming from Miska, and that can be relevant.
And notably, it's even if it is a special, it's not coming from bear. Like a special has to come from Miska.
Right, but I'm sorry. What I mean is, I declare I declare a normal coming from bear. That strike could be a normal coming from bear. It could also be a special.
Right.
Period. It from
Yeah.
any from me with bear rush from bear anything. It cannot be a normal coming from Miska. Which
Right.
means that even though it seems to me like I should always be declaring strikes coming from bear because it enables mix-ups, like they can't guess what it is, it does mean that they know that it's not coming from Miska, and that actually could be relevant.
Right.
Okay.
And other situation where that's relevant is particularly when you're close, as like a position like this. Um, like if you were to declare your normal from bear here, then assault looks really good. So it does depend on your circumstance, but most of the time, yes, especially when you have distance, declaring your normals from bear, especially when you're in exceed mode, it's not costing you anything. You don't really have a reason not to
Right.
most of the
It
time.
it just increases the number of things that they need to worry about. Um, the number of threats that they need to worry about. Um, I mean, but just watch out for anything that your opponent does that could land them on bear.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, where did we put? So we were talking bear rush. Anything else on this card, or should we move to its boost?
Um, I think that's it. Yeah, we just moved to the
Okay.
boost. Um, it's Iron Will, +1 power or +1 armor and +3 guard. It is defend with a different name.
It's defend. Okay. I mean, I've heard of this boost. I know how this boost works. Um, is it particularly valuable to Miska to have two copies of defend?
It is useful, especially because the times when you would want to use defend, spike for Miska is particularly dangerous because of how she can position bear. So for many characters, depending on the circumstance, you might throw away spike because you're thinking it's just not going to be you're not going to be on a useful position to use the spike.
Right.
Miska does not have that problem pretty much ever. She can threaten spike from anywhere because of where she can move bear.
Sure. Sure.
So losing spike to play a defend is not appealing. So if you were able to defend with something that wasn't spike, that's preferable. So that's one reason. And notably, that kind of boost is particularly useful on Silverfang, as it
Yep.
makes Silverfang very easy to confirm in pretty much any circumstance.
Sure. And I mean, basically, I mean, the rule of thumb is like anything uh, that is probably going to get you value if only it had some guard. So like assault is like range one assault is really like really loves defend. It seems like canine strike to try to confirm your before effect could be very nice to put on it.
Yep.
Okay. And so basically, by having two copies of this boost, pressure is taken off of both Spike and Bear Rush. I can use either of these cards more freely because I'm not worried about running out of defend.
Yes.
Okay, sure.
That's pretty much Bear Rush. It can also depend on the circumstance. Some characters tend to have fewer cards in hand than others, and some tend to have more. The ones who like to hold on to cards and have many options all at once, they tend to be more susceptible to Bear Rush as it tends to hit them harder.
Right, sure, and they will learn pretty quickly against Miska to not do that because this seems very very threatening against them.
Yeah. Notably, it is also just like the option to threaten when your opponent is standing on bear to try to prevent normals from bear. They're still being threatened just by a different source.
Right, right, okay, I
And
gotcha.
then with that, we can segue into Savage Wildsider, which is the other one that does that. Her first Ultra. Well, I guess at this point, I can also cover this one to get the specials out of the way. The boost. If the opponent is on the same space as your bear marker, move him up to 3 spaces for 0 force. So this is another answer to your opponent standing on bear to prevent your normals. This is your okay. Well, get off of bear.
Right,
Uh,
right,
so it is a useful tool, particularly when you're trying to make the most of your distance and you have the board in a position like this, where the whole reason you had that distance was because you wanted to threaten your normals from over here. Because notably, Miska does have some pretty long range, but she's not that far usually. She's got
outside of
a
scorched
canine
earth,
strike,
right.
right? So like she's not threatening her silver fang and kneecapper from all the way over here. So her normals is what she wants, and this is just a tool to maybe against Ryu. It's a bad example because Ryu is just going to do it again. Um, but
That's a fair point, right?
in
Maybe at that
most
point
cases,
you need
yeah,
to use bear rush on him.
yeah, in most cases, you'll have at least a little bit of just at least forcing them to burn some kind of resources to get back over there.
Right,
Onto Savage Wildsider. Uh, 0 range. So this one, unlike Bear Rush, does not hit adjacent to Bear. This one only hits exactly on Bear. 6 power, 6 speed though, and stun immunity. Always calculates its range from Bear, which is kind of interesting. It doesn't really mean anything because it's range 0, so Miska couldn't physically hit with this anyway.
right.
Uh, but it is a essentially really easy to confirm damage. This is the real threat you have to say don't stand on the dog because he'll bite you.
He'll bite
Uh,
you, and I mean 1 gauge it replaces itself. It's really cheap.
right, and it not only because it replaces itself, and at speed 6 it almost always confirms its hit, especially from long distance. And then it also has stun immunity for good measure. So even if they did manage to hit you first, and what's important with this is because it calculates range from bear. So even if they say grasp you at this range, no matter where they put Miska's not
Right,
the one hitting. So
they
they're still
have to
going to
move.
right.
Okay. So,
Uh,
so
so-
again, unless you have a speed 7 or I guess speed 6 on offense repositional option, if you are chip and you can grasp out of this is dodgeable. But like this is hard to not get hit by.
yes,
Don't stand on the dog.
yeah. And That's not really all there is to say about that. It is the because if you're standing on the dog and you don't have a way to move off, it doesn't really matter what you do to Miska. No matter where you move Miska, you're not stunning, you're not moving out of position.
Right.
Bear is still going to hit you.
Right. Okay. And probably for at least as much as you're hitting him. Like this is going to trade up or just beat you clean because 6/6 is a really strong stat line.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
That's the important note is the stun immunity isn't even the main thing. It's the stun immunity is even if you were going to be fast enough, you still uh yeah.
If you were going to be fast enough and also you were going to deal more than 6 damage, that's probably an ultra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
That's
guess I guess we do have the man that would do that here.
right. But I mean, okay. But this is a way to trade into Matsushiro Yuken. That doesn't happen
Right.
very often. I mean, stun immunity is useful for that too.
Right. Even when say Ryu does his Way of the Warrior into Metsushuyukin, because usually he'd do that to try to like
Turn off focus
prevent
or something. Sure.
prevent you from using focus. You can get as fast as you want or as strong as you want. It's not going to get around the Savage Wildsider.
Right, sure. Okay. So this could also, I mean, like all stun immunity things, sometimes you just need stun immunity. It would be to force a trade into something that you could normally never trade with.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. How about priority requisition?
Priority requisition is potentially very good, but it's kind of similar to the helping hand boost. It is difficult to make proper use of. It requires 2 force, and then search your deck for a card, add it to your hand. I'll also get to the errata for this, but search your deck for a card, add it to your hand, then strike, and then shuffle your deck afterwards.
Right.
Kind of, I'd say minor errata is important though. This is search your deck for a card, add it to your hand, then shuffle, then strike. Like you need to shuffle before you do the strike.
Oh, so you can't wild swing and know what it is.
Right. Yes, that's the important
Interesting.
thing.
Okay.
And there's even like two different interpretations you could do for that because technically the order of the deck doesn't really matter when she's searching it. So she could theoretically just put any card she wanted on top and then strike. It's a kind of a silly, obviously not what the card was intended to be able to do.
Right.
But it is an important little change in text. She cannot know what the top card is and then strike with it from the wild swing.
Gotcha.
At
Okay.
least
So
at
so
least on her own.
so presumably you are using this to get a card you want to strike with, but you don't have to. You could get a card you wanted to boost with and strike with something else. You could get an EX attack.
Correct. I would
Okay.
say the most appropriate use for this is when you know that your Savage Wildsider is going to win the game, and so to style on your opponent, you priority requisition to grab the other Savage Wildsider and hit them with it.
And hit them with that, of course, of course. Okay. So does that from that example, does that mean that in reality you probably aren't going to play this boost very often?
It is difficult. You need to have the Savage Wildsider in your hand, which isn't too uncommon. You typically want to hold it onto it as a threat anyway. But that
Right.
also means that you didn't strike with it, which is a lot of the time what happens. It only costs one gauge. It's easy to set up. Usually, you end up hitting with this. Um, uh, but it's assuming you had this in your hand. You have the 2 extra force because you need this and 2 more force to be able to use it in the first place.
Right.
You need to be in a position where you have a card that would be in a you're typically going to want to like end the game or get in a very good position with this. You don't want to just do a regular old strike. You want to be pretty confident that you're going to get some good like results out of it because it's going to be expensive.
Right.
So you need to be in a position where you have a card that would have been in that like checkmating position, and you also need to have one of those cards left in your deck because like you need them to not be in your discard or gauge already. Uh, and then if it were in a position where it was a normal that you wanted to hit with from bear, if you're not exceeded, you would need another 2 force to be able to declare it from bear if you weren't
Right.
already exceeded. So
So
it
man,
can be it's an expensive endeavor. It needs to be very well worth it. It's just kind of the stars need to align for it to be worth it. It does happen from time to time, and when it does, it's very useful. But it's definitely not one that you're expecting to use. It's just kind of in your back pocket that you might use.
okay, so I mean that's a lot of conditionals that you just laid out that need to be fulfilled before this card is useful. This boost is useful. It's like whatever you're getting needs to do more than easily confirmable 6 damage, right?
Yes, which is not
That's
typically the case.
hard. It's gonna be that or like I'm here and we got this situation going on, and I've got 3 gauge, but I don't have scorched earth, and I
Right.
need it
Yeah.
right now.
That's one of the situations where that happens. And then of course that requiring that you're in a position something like this and you have the Savage Wildsider and 2 extra force and 3 gauge and you still have one of these left in the deck.
Right. I mean, honestly, it kind of feels like most of the time what I should do instead in that situation is be like, okay, as an action, I move bear here or
Yeah.
something, rather than all of that extra expenditure to hit with something else.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it is potentially useful. Most of the time though, this is an attack and not a boost.
makes sense. It seems like a good attack, so that does not seem like it's too tough to convince. How about Scorched Earth? We've talked about it a couple times. That's 10 damage. That's a lot of power.
Yep. We got the good old big ultra 4 to 8, so it hits at the other half of the arena. 10 power, which is significant. 0 speed, but similar to the other two, it is stun immunity. Hit push as far as possible, like basically fire in the hole, but with longer range and more damage.
Right.
It is it mostly in these two positions, 7 or 8. As then, even if your opponent were to dive, they're still going to get hit. Usually, this ends up being a game closer. One, just because it's difficult to get into this position in the first place. It deals 10 damage, so it tends to close the game out anyway. But it's also usually when you had 3 gauge, you wanted to exceed. So this is usually going to end up being like your 6th gauge if you're able to use it, which
Right.
is usually pretty late on into the game.
By then, they probably have less than 10 life anyway.
Right.
Okay.
It is more often than not, it's an option that you're essentially just going to threaten. Most of the time, you don't get to hit with it because your opponent uh, doesn't want
Doesn't
to
want to
get
get hit
hit
by
with
10
it.
damage.
Yeah,
I can't
unsurprisingly.
I can't imagine why. So in a similar way to like Bear Rush is there to keep your opponent from just prepping forever. Scorched Earth is there to make your opponent be afraid to be as far away from you as possible.
Right.
Okay.
Particularly when you have 3 gauge. What's notable is that even if you don't have 3 gauge, if you got like 1 or 2, because Bear can still hit you from over there, and you can like boost with say on patrol to get that extra gauge. It can mean that even if she doesn't have the 3 gauge, as long as she still has a copy left and you're at this distance, it's not necessarily safe. It just means you might have an extra turn or two. Um, uh, but that's the other note there is because Miska would like to be in this position anyway. The Scorched Earth isn't the only reason. It's just
Right.
another threat they need to watch out
Right.
for.
Okay. So really I am like this is not changing my game plan. I'm not pivoting over to play this card. If I find myself in a situation where I can hit Scorched Earth, I will do it because it seems very strong. But
Right.
I'm not by trying to set up this card, I am trying to set up the rest of my game plan anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's the reason why it works pretty well for Miska's kit because she would like to be in this position anyway. It doesn't have she doesn't really telegraph it because this was always the plan.
Okay, so
Uh,
hopefully it comes up and I hit with it, but if not, I do all the other stuff I was going to do anyway.
yes.
Okay.
Most of the time, it tends to be difficult to hit with. Again, like for the obvious reason of your opponent doesn't want to be in this position anyway. But also, you need the 3 gauge, which like 3 gauge is a little bit is significant already. It's 3 gauge, but particularly for Miska as well as a lot of the other season ones, as she doesn't have the like means of like action compression and boost that draw cards. So most of the ways that Miska ends up drawing her cards is like preparing and changing cards,
Right.
which
That could use
usually for
gauge.
her, yeah, because she could use her gauge for that. So if she wasn't relying on the ultra plan, um, then that gauge is very useful for being able to restock her hand, which is also very important for Miska. So she kind of has to compete for more options or powerful option.
Or the big crazy 10 damage one. So when you said that this is potentially like the thing that you do with your sixth gauge, it actually might be what you do with your eighth gauge or your ninth gauge, because some of that was going towards changing cards or moving around.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And as well as the other note with this one is the boost, which is also significant. Brilliant Tactician, 0 force, continuous boost for +3 speed. It is a swift destruction that costs 1 less, but it gives you 1 less.
Yeah, I mean, +2 speed is already good, and plus 3 swordplay. I don't know if you know this. That's more than +2.
That is indeed a little bit more than +2.
So but now I've got dives my opponent can't cross out of even on defense. I've got spikes that if they pass the turn to me, they can't cross out. Like uh, +3 speed on mid speeds is pretty messed up. Um, in her kit, are there any particular standout combos with Brilliant Tactician, or is it just like +3 speed is good?
+3 speed is just good, especially because she has bear, so she just threatens everything from everywhere with +3 speed. You're never just okay with this. It's always a problem.
Okay. So this seems like it'd be tech bait then.
It very much is, which
Okay.
is another reason why the say like Canine Strike. If your opponent dives into this, you lose the strike and you kind of lose the positioning that you wanted. But now they have 1 less option to deal with this.
Right.
So
And I kind of like the synergy there though, because if they dive, I'm sorry, if they tech Brilliant Tactician, that's also one fewer dives to get out of Scorched Earth, but you just use the Scorched Earth to set up Brilliant Tactician. So I kind of like that symmetry.
yeah,
Um, so I'm using this because it's cheap, it's strong, but I might occasionally. So it seems like if they come up early in the game, Brilliant Tactician is kind of a no brainer.
yes.
And would I be holding Scorched Earth for the end, or would I just be like, man, that +3 speed seems like it'd be pretty good right now, and I would probably use it early and then not have Scorched Earth for the end game?
Admittedly, it is often a +3 speed. It's just very good. The other note, sometimes it's forced to pay for like an early attack.
Okay.
Uh, preferably In the early game, I might use Savage Wildsider. It just depends on the circumstance, which one you want to threaten. Like the +3 speed or the cheap 1 gauge ultra, because that's really easy to set up in the early game.
Right.
Especially when you're trying to save up gauge anyway, so you just keep bear on them, and they have to always be aware that 6 power, 6 speed Sun Immune is a threat.
Is the thing that they've got to deal with. Okay, sure, that makes sense.
And you're not
Um,
really worried about playing it because it kind of refunds itself, so you're not losing a gauge to do that. So
right,
it
right. And
there's that.
like it's a strong enough attack that going gauge neutral with Savage Wildsider does not feel like a loss by any means.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So it does tend to be a boost more often than not, especially towards the early game. It turns into a threat like when you are usually already exceeded and you're threatening being able to like push your opponent away with fire in the hole,
Right.
or you're like in an opposite position and you're threatening to retreat all the way with Canine Strike,
Right.
and being able to follow up with a Scorched Earth from max distance. Your opponent just kind of has to be aware of that, and it also it depending on the state of their deck as it gets later on into the game, and they've lost their options to deal with either of these two. Um, then once they've lost their option to deal with it and they end up forced into this position, they don't really have an answer for this.
Right. Right. You also mentioned sort of nearer to the beginning of the lesson that uh, there is kind of sort of a competition between Miska's Exceed mode and Scorched Earth. Like sometimes you might delay exceeding or you might not exceed because if your opponent's already at range 8 and you have 3 gauge, you're like, well, that's 10 damage. That seems pretty good.
Right,
But
especially in this position, because again, most characters just don't have a means of getting out of
they
this.
can't get out no matter what they
Right,
do.
so they are essentially forced to block. But even if they do block, that's an expensive block.
Sure, right. So, but realistically, most of the time, this is my secondary play to exceeding. This really would be a late game play.
Yes,
Uh,
that is a like you would consider using this if it just happened to fall in your lap.
right.
But
All the
most of
pieces
the
just
time,
assembled for you, basically.
right, most of
Okay.
the time it will be used to exceed first.
Okay. So we've gone through specials and ultras now. We know what she does. Obviously, we know that normals are gonna be incredibly relevant because they are how she mounts her offense with Bear. Um, is there about anything about the normals in particular, any of their boosts, any of their use cases that synergize particularly well or that are particularly important to her game plan that you want to cover?
There are many.
Okay, awesome.
One is just the obvious of being able to hit from that distance in the first place.
Right,
Others are depending on your positioning. One of like the best positions, if you're going to end up being close with Miska, this is one of the best positions to be in for that, because you can kind of just threaten everything. From this position, I guess your own specials don't really matter so much, but your ability to say spike, for example, very difficult for your opponent to get out of that one,
right.
because they can't grasp you because they move you and not Bear. So Bear still hits them. If they assault you, they're not going to break your guard.
They
They
cross out,
can
they're still getting hit. And why would
right
they cross in this position?
if they sweep or focus, they're getting hit by the spike. Cross, obviously, yeah, not going to help them. They can dive over you, but
Right.
that's really bad as well, especially because you can spike on defense because you're not worried about your guard getting broken. You're not trying to, because you're also not even competing with their own spike because they can't hit you with their own spike.
Sure, yeah, and now it's like a legitimate defensive mid speed.
Right. And so you defend with your spike, and if their only option was to try to dive over you in the first place, then for one, they're not hitting you. You can't hit them, but that's fine
Right,
because
right.
now they're in this position and pass the lead back to you, and you're in a perfect position to hit them with Silverfang and push them
And
into an even better position
for the
like this.
rest of everything you want to do.
Right. So like they kind of just play right into your hand. So this is a very good position for Miska, particularly like when she has spike to threaten.
Okay.
At least again, like regarding depending on what your opponent is, for example, this position is a lot less good when Ryu has 4 gauge.
Or when Ryu has donkey kick or something, for example. But basically, if you're not doing this, odds are you're doing something like this.
Right.
You're
Yeah, if you're able to threaten this, this is a very good move.
okay. Sounds good. Sounds good.
But it also works for like even sweep. It's just like pretty much in this position, anything sweep was going to work against. Spike pretty much also works against. The only
Right.
difference is sweep is a little bit tougher. Um, there are also positions such as in the rare instance where you end up on bear or you're in a position something like this, being able to hit with dive at this distance, because you're going to go over them. But if you declared it from bear, you
Dive
still
dive
you
still
still get
hits.
the opponent can't hit you effect by going over them, but bear is still in position to hit them.
Oh, that's fun. Okay.
Similarly, there's positions like this where you cross and declare from bear. You weren't in range, but bear still hits, and you still get your retreat that you were looking for.
Right. And so some of this is kind of overlapping with like it's just good to have disjointed hitboxes. But in particular, like what you're leveraging in those cases are like movement effects that would be useful to you anyway. Getting out of the corner with dive, backing up with cross. But hey, conveniently they now hit.
Yeah, it can be a little bit trickier. Like you can still threaten things like dive and assault from here, but there are, because it still moves you.
Right.
So doing something like that, you want to make sure that you're not sacrificing distance for no reason. You want to make the most use of it.
Right.
Uh,
They'll be coming to you. Don't do their job for them.
right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So those can be a little tricky to hit. Dive was one of the examples, just because you're able to, if you're able to do something like that, it can be useful to get out of the corner and still
Right.
manage to hit them.
Right.
Um, the requires a bit of caution as well, because when you're in this position and you declare from bear, it's a little telling that you're intending to move. Otherwise, you might have just done it from yourself. But it can also be useful to uh, like s- fake them out with a declaring from bear and then hitting them with a silver fang anyway.
Sure. Okay. And get them off of you that way. Sure, I get you.
Um, but yeah, it varies. But that's one of the examples. Ideally, though, you just want distance where you're out of normal range, essentially. And then anything works. Because being able to sweep your opponent from this distance is, needless to say, extremely useful.
Right. Yeah, I would love a full board sweep. I mean,
uh,
even if we're not at full board, like sweep here. If bear's in the exact center of the arena, sweep is covering like this is some Sydney and Serena ranges at that point. Like you have a ton of flexibility with hitting with sweep and things like that. Like that's they're not diving over that.
right.
Okay.
Well, and notably in this instance, dive would be the correct play
Right,
because they
because
would end up
they can
on
land on
bear.
bear. Right, of course.
But it does make it useful in positions such as like this, or maybe the other way around as well, like this, where you're playing your own sweep and you declare from bear. Uh,
Sure, they can't cross
uh,
out no matter what they do
right, because they end up crossing into
into bear.
into the sweep.
Right, right.
It is uh, forgot where I was going with that. Oh, the other things are um, like being able to use Iron Will or defend. Again, I tend toward Iron Will.
Because you
Uh,
love your spike setup so much.
right. Yes. Well, when you're able to threaten Spike from any distance, especially when you have access to a +3 speed boost, it's too good not to make use of.
Sure, sure, of course.
But when you're able to use defend, even things like assault or dive, things that you were afraid that you would have been stunned by if you were close enough. Um, uh, then like because I guess in assault's case it was already useful against things like grasp, but like for something like dive from here, if you're able to get that defend on, even if you didn't get the ability to move over them, uh, just being able to hit with bear still, because if they weren't able to stun you with
Right.
that movement.
Right, yeah. So you're doubling up. So you're not going to deposition yourself, but you're also not going to be stunned now. You're even more likely to land that hit. Okay. So at this
It,
point,
it
like,
doesn't it doesn't really give her an additional option. Rather, like it just means that she's able to, because for example, you could have already defended into an assault and gotten basically the same thing. It just means that she's able to also defend into like a dive, because normally they could grasp you and move you here, and then you wouldn't have hit anyway.
Right, and now that doesn't matter because they can't grasp bear. You can't step on
Right.
the dog. You also can't grasp the dog.
Yeah.
Okay, so tons and tons of flexibility among the normal attacks. Any particular standout uses for normal boosts, or is she pretty much? I mean, I was going to say she's pretty much using them like any other character, but I can already assume that like backstep is going to see a lot more use on her than most characters would. Is she going to
Right.
use them like any other zoner would? I guess I should ask.
Most often. It does depend. Her boosts tend to she would like to attack more often than not. Assault is the one exception. Notably because assault is not ideal for Miska to use in the first place because she doesn't want to get
She doesn't
closer
want
to
to
you if
move
she
in,
doesn't have to.
right?
So if she had the option to just use it to get away from you, that's better. Uh, the other ones are pretty much all attacks. Focus is debatable, just because reading is also always good. Um, and usually, if she has the distance that she wanted, the defensive nature of focus is less appealing because she already had distance to compensate for the defense.
Right. Um,
Uh,
and
but
and I assume like even if you're already at extreme range, fierce might be a little bit tough to play because you'd be giving your opponent more time. If you are that far out, you probably just want to hit them.
right, yeah,
Okay.
and that is pretty much exactly the reason as well, especially with grasp. Because the trying to spend a move to get a fierce to be able to make your next move more powerful is less useful when you probably could have just hit them with the grasp and they couldn't have responded with anything to hit you with anyway.
Right. Right. I mean that's a strong move even when you're like here. Like this is already good. If you're already all the way across the arena, this is basically just free damage.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's essentially getting you're getting the extra damage you wanted and a gauge out of it, and not giving your opponent an extra turn.
Right. Okay. So at this point, so now we've sort of run through I think most of the combos and stuff you're looking for. Now I'm looking for like heuristics. So it seems like one of the strongest places that you can have bear is here. I mean, like taking Misk off the board for a second is here or right next to your opponent because that is threatening both Bear Russian, Savage Wildsider, and a ton of your normals because many of them hit at range one. It's pretty much the only thing you're not threatening with is Spike. Um, but because of how powerful Spike is, it is frequently also a great idea to have Bear within kind of two spaces of your opponent.
It
Outside of that, is there ever really any need to like obviously Bear's not going to be useful over here, but is it useful at range 3 or is that more the kind of thing that will happen over the course of the game but you're not necessarily setting him up at range 3?
it does depend on the opponent. Based on the movements that's printed on their cards, if they have extra movement, because range 2 is useful for bear, even if you wanted to use sweep, for example. If your opponent is full of, like, say, Chip, because he likes to move one a lot, you don't
Right.
want to be at range 1 because then that gives him the opportunity to step one onto bear. So you'd like that extra distance to prevent Chip from being able to do that.
Okay.
Same with like Zolt, or usually the like extra move ones on everything is not too common, but there are plenty of other characters who have a lot of like move one on their cards.
Sure. I mean, Ryu's a good example. You critical Shoryuken to dodge a sweep in this position uh, seems pretty good. So
Right.
sometimes you might want to like you look at how many things your opponent has that moves them forward versus how many things that moves them back, and just put Bear on the other side or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the typical tactic.
Okay. So I'm trying to keep Bear relatively close to my opponent. If I'm setting him farther away, it's to set up something like Spike. But I'm not going to be setting Bear every turn. People are going to be moving around. I'm going to be moving around. My opponent's going to be moving around. We are going to land in situations where, you know, this has happened. I didn't set this, but it's happened that way. And that I guess learning to learning to play learning to play my hand with where Bear wound up versus where I set him seems important. How much forethought in where Bear is required for Miska play? Do you pretty much just be like, I'm going to put him here because I have an attack that lands here, and if they move, I still have a follow up? Or are you really like 4D chessing and thinking 20 moves ahead about your Bear placement?
I don't know about 20 moves ahead. It's usually a move ahead. Admittedly, the notable thing with Miska's kit is she is very flexible in her options. Particularly because of bear. So
Right.
it tends to the positioning of bear tends to change on a turn by turn basis. That is depending on what options I have available in my hand, how many options I have already lost. To like keep in mind of like what I'm currently threatening now and what I still have the potential to threaten later.
Right.
And what options my opponent knows are already turned off. For example, if I'm a bear rush down and both Savage Wildsiders down, I really do not want you to stand on bear because I don't have much to threaten
Right.
anymore.
So then you're looking at like, okay, do they have assaults left? Don't put bear here. Put bear
Yeah,
here instead. Put bear here instead. If the vulnerability is particularly pronounced on top of bear, don't put him in a place where your opponent could easily land on him.
yeah, and
Okay.
it is most of the time moving bear is not too big of a deal. You're not wanting to lose actions when possible, obviously. But because bear is so useful even on defense, it's not too bad. Ryu here, I guess, is a rough example because Ryu can just you move bear and Ryu
Can
says,
just
"Okay,
always
I'll
stand on
move
him.
on bear."
Right.
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 You kind of have to move additional spaces to kind of prevent that.
Right.
Um, but for the most part, most characters have to spend some kind of resource to move,
To keep up with bear, and you can do this for
whether
free.
that be force or boosts. And so when they spend their resources to do their movement, and you don't spend resources to get the same position, you're essentially gaining an extra card where your opponent also had to burn the same action that you did, but also had to spend something for it where you didn't.
Right.
Uh,
So even though your economy is kind of shaky, you can, in that situation, you can kind of get a little bit of an edge on economy by just continually threatening bear and making them respect it.
right.
Okay. Um,
Uh,
and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
just go ahead. I lost
I
it.
I was actually going to segue into asking about a little bit more about economy. So we have a couple cards that we're very willing to spend as force. We've got our ultras occasionally. We've got canine strike sometimes. Um, how it seems like Miska's economy is tough to manage, in part because bear is expensive, but mostly just because I don't have the card draw. I'm going to need to slow down and prepare sometimes. Um, is it? And it seems like her wild swings would be very difficult to manage because of how flexible her ranges are, or
Yeah.
how specific and weird her ranges can be. Rather, how flexible her positioning can be. Is it difficult to uh keep tempo as Miska while I'm keeping all my economy stuff running? Or because I'm threatening at such extreme ranges sometimes, do I occasionally just have the ability to prepare?
You it did typically you will end up having to prepare just occasionally. You do you want to try to keep yourself in a position where you are able to defend yourself with something
Right,
at any given moment.
right.
Which I guess kind of goes without saying. It's a little more flexible because almost any time having a card in your hand almost always means that you have something to threaten. Like the very rare instances are like that you don't is when you're like over here, like because your Silver Fang and Kneecapper don't hit from over here. That's pretty much the only
Right. And
circumstance.
you've managed to have zero normals in your hand.
Right, because pretty much every normal is going to hit. Like even if you only have a dive,
Right.
like
It'll work.
you're still going to hit with bear. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, so you have something to threaten. Notably, it's like also on defense against bear. So even if they were going to strike you from over here, but most of the time you want to make use of like a position like this. Like even if you have to burn precious few options in your hand, because you want to make the most of this position while you can. Because assuming a competent opponent, they're not just going to sit here and just let you
Right.
hit them with bear. They're going to spend the stuff to get up to you,
Right.
and you're going to lose this position quickly.
So press the offense a little bit longer than you think you can, because you can, like maybe don't go to absolutely zero cards in hand, but because your ranges are so good, because you can hit with things so well, you can sustain an offense a little bit longer than most other characters can without needing to reload. Is that correct?
It is. I guess I wouldn't say that you can. She doesn't really have the extra resources to be able to. It's just that you will want to burn more than you might normally want to on offense, just because you won't be able to keep this position for very long.
I gotcha. All
Uh,
right.
so
It's a time
if
limited
you
offer.
Right. Yeah. So
Right.
if you chose to try to get more options later than take your option now, then when you end up in this position now, it's
Right.
unknown if you will get that opportunity again.
And how useful were those options relative to how useful was this position?
Right.
Right. Okay, I gotcha. All right. So, any other kind of strategic considerations about Miska you wanted to mention? I've got economy down. I've got the kit down. I got normals down. You're ticking all the boxes off my list. What else we got?
That is, admittedly, most of it. She doesn't have necessarily fantastic combo attacks. Like she does. They're just like the obvious. She doesn't have like hidden ones. She has like
Right.
the obvious hit with fire in the hole, followed by like scorched earth
Scorched
from
Earth.
this
Yeah.
distance.
Make space into a thing that punishes space.
Right.
Right.
Other ones are, of course, like again, more fairly obvious, like brilliant tactician into anything really, but like Spike or Silver Fang or Kneecapper, all great options. Even like your Canine Strike being speed 6 to be able to get that distance from somewhere like this.
Right.
Because now that you're speed 6, it's not a super threatening attack, at least on its own. This attack isn't threatening, but this
But
position
this
is.
position is super
So
threatening. Okay.
yes.
Okay. I gotcha. Cool.
So being able to just establish that and tell your opponent they can't do anything about it because they're too slow
Right.
is yeah.
Right, sure. I mean, plus 3 speed enables a lot of things, but you might as well enable something that will let you do a ton more offense rather than just like one kind of pretty good strike. All right, so we've talked about all of the Miska things now. I have to know, what is my opponent doing to deal with her? What is the counterplay to Miska? How do you stop her?
It does depend on the one of the obvious is you typically want to be close to Miska.
Mhm.
Uh, the strength of the disjointed hitbox becomes less and less useful when they're not able to threaten it as
Right.
much.
When there's less room
Um,
for the disjoint to matter.
right. Yes. If you're able to, you want to be close to Miska when possible, to at least if you can turn off the rest of the special options and the only things she can use is normals, that decreases her options, especially if she's not exceeded yet and now would have to burn extra resources to be able to hit from Bear from a different
Right.
position. So she's just ends up being just a normal use character if you can stick close. Of course, Miska's kit is pretty much entirely built on trying to establish distance. So it will be definitely a chore of chasing Miska down. But it is worth doing because the longer that you spend in bad positions like this, the more value Miska can get just by being able to poke you with Bear and you not being able to respond properly.
Right.
Uh, the other notes are kind of paying attention to which options Miska has used to decide whether you want to be on Bear or not, because that is a decision to make. Sometimes it is the correct move, and sometimes it is not.
Sometimes it's very,
Uh,
very not.
yeah. Choosing when you want to be on Bear or not is important. Um, uh, Other notes are uh, I'm honestly not sure what is better for the opponent. One of the like clear options that people like to use is using cross to boost with run.
Right.
But there are some instances, particularly like when you're in a position like this where you have Miska like kind of in a corner, but she's able to have Bear like behind her. Um, uh, like where you might want to cross, or like in a position like this, let's say. And so, like if you were betting that say I was going to try to spike you from Bear here, um, and the question ends up being like, what are you going to do about it? You could cross because this would put you at range 1 from Bear, so the spike might not hit you.
Right.
Um, but one now you're giving distance, but there's also the other note of that being like one of the few ways you could have gotten out of it.
You could have landed back in, right.
Right, and one of the benefits of cross is, of course, the boost, particularly that people want to use against like ranged characters like this to use the boost to save some resources on that movement in, uh, because cross is actually a valuable like defensive option against Miska. So by using it offensively to get up to her, you can lose that option later.
Right. So deciding how to use your crosses in the moment is an important uh, point for your opponent. Like that is a decision tree that they're going to need to manage.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Other notes are. I think that might really be the only real one. Like the other ones, it tends to change so much on a round by round basis. It's difficult to establish like a baseline.
Right. Sure. I mean, lesson one, run up to her and punch her in the face. Lesson two, watch out for the dog. Lesson three, don't be afraid to give her a little bit of space if you have to dodge something, but be careful to be able to get back in. That seems like solid counterplay.
Right.
Oh,
And I suppose I would say as well, uh, you don't even not necessarily being at like range 1 or 2, but like even being in a position like this against Miska, 3 might be risky because you're opening up fire in the hole.
yeah.
But a position like this is also good. Be trying to make it more difficult for Miska to get over you.
Right. Right. Okay. I get you. And like sometimes the advice against zoners is like to keep center stage and not chase them too much because then they don't have if I'm here, Miska can never run that far away from me. But for Miska,
Right.
it's like, okay, I have fire in the hole. You don't have center stage anymore. She can make a ton of space if you give her a little bit. So like
Right. Yeah.
maintaining this position against her does not seem as strong as it would be against another kind of zoner.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true.
Okay. Okay. So
There's also like even in addition to that, just the ability for because again the further away from you, the further away from Miska you are, essentially the higher on the speed curve Bear becomes.
true.
So it the more distance you make, the harder it is to. Oh, I disconnected from Steam apparently.
Oh. Oh. I can still hear you just fine.
Alrighty, that's good.
All right. But yeah, you're right. So bear being even more above curve gives you even more reason to stay relatively close up to her. Okay, that makes sense.
Right, because if you have a little bit of distance, then something like being able to just grasp you.
Right. Right. I get you. Okay. Um. Yeah. All right. Cool. So that's counterplay. Acknowledging the fact that your computer seems to be wanting to kick us off here. Let's go to wrap it up really really quick before we finish up. Miska is a character who has not been in competitive play for a long time. Theory crafting with me for a second here and imagining that she steps into a time machine and pops out in the year of our Lord 2024 against a bunch of Guilty Gear characters and Blaze Blue and Undernet characters that she's never fought before. How would Miska do in a modern Exceed meta? Has the game changed enough that her position in the meta would be particularly different, or is she kind of just going to do what she would always do?
For the most part, I think she'll mostly do what she would always do against seasons 6 and 7 in particular. It would be more of a struggle. Um, it's kind of a recurring theme, at least with the older seasons anyway, particularly season 1, maybe 2 as well. The like action compression
Yeah,
of season 6 and 7. Season 6 being full of all kinds of boosts that are do this then strike,
right,
and then season 7 of course has cancel.
right,
So one of Miska's whole like one of her strong options is being able to position Bear and then tell the opponent, okay, what are you going to do about this? And when you're fighting against a season, they can say, okay, I'm going to get my original position and still strike you,
right,
rendering your action to threaten them kind of obsolete because they were able to just overcome it that easily anyway.
right, right.
This is not necessarily entirely new. There were other characters. One example is like season 1. Ulrich is a move 1 then strike, kind of a good answer to threatening positions with Bear. But it is worth noting that like season 7s are able to do that particularly well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, anything where you are passing the turn to your opponent and saying, "Deal with this," a Guilty Gear character is like, "I will, thank you,"
Right.
and then they
Yes.
kill you
Yeah.
for it.
And her not having because she doesn't have a like a move Bear then strike option.
Right.
Like if she's gonna move Bear, she can move Bear during a strike. That's the best she can do.
Right.
Um,
It seems
but
like
like she doesn't have an option to say like, oh, surprise, there's Bear on you and attack.
right. It
So
seems
she
like
always has to pass the lead back to you.
it seems like the one thing that she has that they don't know what to deal or how to deal with would be uh, a lot of stats. Like I don't think that um, outside of like Leo and his some of his like ultra boosts and stuff or his ultras that have crazy speed modifiers, I don't think that Guilty Gear hitters have ever heard of +3 speed.
Okay.
Um, so maybe just leveraging big stats against them might be more relevant. But yeah, I think the action compression really does mess things up for her.
Yes, that would be the greatest concern, especially when Miska was already concerned about wasting an action, or I don't know about wasting an action, but being forced to have to spend an action to like try to recover cards as
Right.
well, because her card draw is pretty limited. So when she's already considering that option for her resources, and then also having to consider that her opponent can effectively do
Blow her
that
up.
and more, yeah.
Right. Right. All right. So yeah, that would give her trouble. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So you have.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go
one
ahead.
one one more note, which is kind of important. There is reading against Miska specifically is can be a little more tricky as well, because usually you're considering how the normal would work based on your current range to your opponent. However, when trying to read against Miska, you have to consider both where she is and where Bear is relative to you.
Oh, right.
Because
So
reading
normally,
Spike here is not safe
yeah,
because Bear,
in this situation, reading Spike is an amazing play. In this situation, it's not.
right.
That's very cool. Okay. So opponents of Miska, watch out for that. Well, cool. Uh, Swordplay, you have more than met the brief here. I've learned all about Miska. I hopefully the viewers have too. Anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap it up?
I believe that is it. I have a strong suspicion that I'm forgetting something, but I can't remember what it is at the moment, unfortunately.
That's all right. If you do remember it, let me know. I'll put it in the written guide later on. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Really appreciate you being willing to help me out here. Uh, for a peek behind the curtain, when I was getting experts for everybody for this project, viewer at home, Miska was one of the last people that I managed, one of the last slots I managed to fill. And Swordplay, like manna from heaven, comes down and is like, "Yeah, I know Miska. I can do Miska. Let's do it." And saved the entire project. So thank you so much for your expertise, specifically on Caden and Miska, who no one seems to know. Really appreciate you helping out with that. And it's been a blast talking to you.
Thank you for having me. I must admit, I'm not surprised that nobody wanted Caden. I am kind of surprised that people didn't want Missa. She is
Yeah,
fun.
yeah,
So
she seems cool. Yeah, maybe we don't have to. We don't have to talk about Caden. Poor Caden. But no, I think I agree with you there. But yeah, thank you so much. It's been awesome talking to you. Folks at home, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.